Hello. This is a new PowerPoint for me for this semester, but I decided that this was definitely something that the online class needed to have because I deal with this face-to-face in the traditional class, but you have not traditionally gotten this for the online class. So this will be about use of APA and avoiding plagiarism in your various documents you're going to do. Specifically, the first document, which is the memo, the researched memo, and then later the thick outline and presentation that you're going to give in the class. Communication is a social science, therefore we use the American Psychological Association format, or APA. So please recognize that it's different, it looks different. Don't give me things in MLA format. In this class, most of the documents are in the form of a memo, so it's unnecessary to give me anything that is in the form of an essay like you would do for your English or literature class, and definitely would not do the MLA type of formats. Nothing wrong with MLA, it's just not the right discipline, not the right format for this discipline. And as I've said before, the best quick source for this is to go to the OWL Purdue website. And if you go to Google and just start typing OWL in capital letters, it will probably pop up, or you might have to type Purdue. And you can type APA and it'll take you right to that site. Of course, the better thing to do is to have a copy of the APA manual, but that's rather an investment for a student, and I understand. It is in the library, and it's also in the writing lab upstairs. They can help you a great deal with the APA. The library also, if you go to its website, has guides for doing APA as well as MLA. So you really don't have any excuse for not getting this right, and I'll deal with some of the most important parts of it, but the real picky things, for example, how to do the references page, that's just something you have to look up. I couldn't go into every particular variation on that. I'm going to be mostly concerned with in-text citations on this PowerPoint, and the getting that right, and then dealing with the plagiarism issue. When we think about APA, I always think of it this way, that it's concerned mostly about two things. Now, this is not to say it's not concerned about the other things, but as far as the in-text citation, it's concerned about the who and the when. Who wrote it, and when did they write it, or when did they publish it? So typically, therefore, the citation I have there in parentheses, Smith, 2016, would be a basic example of a citation. But of course, nothing simple is ever easy, so there are a lot of variations on this type of thing as well. So, as I said, the basic citation is the last name of the author and the year. If you have more than one author with the same last name, Smith, for example, or Tucker is a common name, you would have to, in that case, put their first initial as well. So if you had a Betty Smith and a Mary Smith, you would have Smith, M, period, 2016 for one of them, and something else for the other one. But normally that does not happen. Also, if you have a situation where you have an author who has written more than one article in a year, which really only happens if you're getting deep into things and have a really long references page, but in that case there's a variation. You'd have to look that one up, but it is a difference. Usually sometimes they'll say like 2016A, 2016B, or something like that. In some cases they put a shortened version of the title, but I don't think that's going to be an issue for right now. Again, some of these variations you're going to have to look up. It's preferable for the use of APA, and this is a little bit of a taking the next step. It's preferable to put this information at the beginning of the borrowed material rather than at the end. And I've got some examples here in the next few bullet points to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about. And along with putting the information as far as the Smith, 2016 or whatever, at the beginning with some a transition word or an introductory word to let the reader know that you've gone from using your own words and your own ideas and your own thoughts to starting to use borrowed material. So the first example I have says, according to a study on sleep deprivation, and then I have the citation, and then I have a summary because I don't have quotation marks there, so that tells me it's a summary of what Smith has said in 2016 piece. Another variation is according to a study by Smith, and then the date in parentheses, etc. Both of those are really what you're wanting to do more than something like a sentence like, college students often suffer severe health effects from a lack of sleep, and then you've got the citation. Now, this is a little bit of a problem because we don't know, if unless you have quotation marks, we really don't know what part you're borrowing from Smith 2016. So that's why it's really better to have introductory phrase or word to let the reader know what you're doing. And notice, however, in the last example, the placement of periods and parentheses, as well as quotation marks. And of course, there are variations on a theme. If there's more than one author, you have some things you have to do. If there are 2 to 5, within the sentence you would use the word and. In the citation of the parentheses, you use an ampersand. And so I have some examples there to show you what I mean. How they're different. If you have more 3 or more authors, after the first time you cite them all, for example, the Smith, Jones, and Tucker example, you would just say Smith et al. And in that fashion as is shown. Students often wonder, well, where do the page numbers come in? And that in APA is when you are directly exactly quoting material from the original source. And I have an example there. However, let me warn you that APA does not want you to use direct quotations very much, unless there's a really good reason for it. And this is what students tend to do. They tend to want to use a lot of quotations, long quotations, because they're just stringing together. We call this string of pearls writing. They're just stringing together a series of quotations culled from various sources. That's not what a good research writing is about. What if you don't have an author? Okay, that always comes up. So look carefully, first of all. There might be one and you're missing it, especially on websites. You just have to dig. It may be there and you just don't see it. If you absolutely cannot find it, this is what you should do. Use the first 2 words or so in the title and quotation marks. So if I have an article that's titled "Employees Differ on the Meaning of Communication Skills in This Market," and the year of copyright is 2016, the citation would look like that. Then we come to the issue of what about if there's no dates, and typically we put ND for the date, as I've shown there. But again, look, dig, find it. It's probably there. Be a detective. It may be at the copyright at the bottom of the page of the web page. It may be at the top of the page, just not really obvious. So if it's a newspaper article, like if it's something from CNN or the Wall Street Journal or some newspaper online or something, there's a date. So keep looking. Something that a lot of people don't know, and I did not know this until I started working on my dissertation, that in APA 6 edition, they have gone to using the past tense when attributing authors. So while it's typical that in MLA you would use the authorial presence, as they call it, we don't do that in APA. So notice if I were writing about something another person wrote, I say in her article on sleep deprivation, Smith wrote, not writes. Okay, so make sure that your attributions in this format where you say states or says or writes, not in present tense. It needs to be stated or said or wrote. Okay, so just be careful about that. Since I've encouraged you in this assignment, and I often do with my students to do first-hand interviews, there's a specific way that you cite interviews, and for oral or personal electronic sources, such as phone calls, interviews, and emails, those are not listed on the references page, but they are only indicated in the text of the paper. And so I've given you an example here of what one would look like, and you'll forgive the fact that I use such boring generic names here, but this way I'm safe from not stepping on anybody's toes. So you'll notice how this is done. This was from an interview that the student would have done with this person named Mary Smith. It does not name, notice, where she actually works, which is probably a good idea to keep it somewhat anonymous. And she may not want you to do that anyway. But she stated that she looks for applicants with energy who seem to want to be there for the interview. Now that is indicating that this is your version of everything she said. Okay, she said a lot of things, and you've culled it down, you've summarized it in that. There's no quotations there because you're not quoting her directly. However, in this next sentence, you are quoting her directly. I believe energy and friendliness in the interview means something in their work ethic. And note the citation, personal communication, comma, and then the date. No need for page, because in this case, since there's no page involved, but there's making a distinction here between what you're summarizing and what she actually said verbatim, directly. Another thing I want to show you, and I have a couple of slide shots on this, screenshots in the next two slides. In Galileo, when you go in to look for an article in Galileo, there is a button you can push for the citation tool. However, you need to be forewarned that those are usually wrong. They're usually right in terms of the order of the information, but they get the alphabetization and the, I should say the capitalization wrong a lot of times. So you will need to correct that. And again, the OWL Purdue or the APA manuals are your best bet for checking to be sure the reference page is right. There's too much to go into here on a references page. If you have a particular question, you can ask me on the discussion board, or you can send me an email. Be sure on your references that you double space them. Even though your memo is, the text is single spaced, you need to double space your references because that's just the way it's done. And then use hanging indent, which means that the first line is against the left margin, and then the second, third, fourth, and following lines are indented 5 spaces. It's called hanging indent. So here's an example of what I was talking about. This is a typical page of a document, an article you would find in Galileo. And over here I have a very hastily drawn arrow that says Cite. And so when you click on that, you will get a list of all the different ways you can cite things. AMA, Turabian, MLA, and then you'll get APA. That always comes up second. Now, this one is totally wrong. It has the author's names all in caps for some reason. It has the title in caps. That's not right. Okay. So you wouldn't put the author's names in capitals. And then in terms of the title of the article, the only things in this one that would be capitalized would be the S in study, the first word. Everything else would be not capitalized. Regarding, students, attitude toward, entrepreneurship, those words would not be capitalized. The rest of the citation is correct. So the order's right and the information's right, but the capitalization is way off. So just be aware of that. Now, moving on to the big P word. along with APA's not liking many direct quotations, APA does not encourage paraphrasing because paraphrasing tends to be interpreted by students as changing a few words in a quotation to make it look like I did something with it. That's not what paraphrasing is. It is really preferable that you uh, take long sections, arguments, or passages and summarize them into a shorter version in your own words. And summarizing forces you to show understanding of the original source's meaning and use your own language. So I often will, in class, will have my hands, and I'll show something about, I'll put my hands about one on top of the other, about 2 feet apart. And I'll say, in paraphrasing, you start with this much, and then you end up with this much, and I don't change my hands. And that's not what you want to do. What you want to do is start with 2 feet apart, and then end up with 6 inches apart. Okay, summarizing in your own words. Now, that's a very crass way of explaining this, but this idea of just taking a passage, changing maybe 30% of the words, switching things around a little bit, that is definitely, that's going to be considered plagiarism, and it's just not something you want to do. So right below this PowerPoint on D2L, I have posted some examples of incorrect source citation, and you can look at it. I have the original site, original information. Then I have a paraphrased version, and I've highlighted all the things that are exactly the same. And then I have a summarized version in your own words. And one thing that, we're not stupid as teachers. One thing we notice when you are using words that are not typical for a college student. So, those kinds of things scream out at us. In terms of Turnitin, all your documents are submitted to Turnitin through the D2L or Georgia View, and it lets me, and you of course, because you have access to the same information, know how much is borrowed. And I check all of them that indicate any color, but a specific number doesn't necessarily indicate plagiarism. It just is something I'm going to look at. So I can't say, well, if it's over 30% or if it's over 20% or something. It doesn't work that way. It's going to tell me how much you're borrowing, but you may be borrowing it correctly, so that's not a problem. And often the reference page is part of that anyway, so that doesn't count. So 2 big examples of plagiarism would be if a chunk of text has not been cited at all, or if it is directly quoted without any quotation marks. And when I say a chunk, I don't mean 3 words, okay? I mean 4 paragraphs, okay? Or a whole paragraph, or even a half a paragraph. So that's the kind of thing we're looking out for. And if your number color is more in Turnitin is more than 20 or 25%, you need to check to make sure you did it correctly. You need to know that in the communication department we take plagiarism seriously. I don't think we're the only ones. You can fail an assignment, the class, or be kicked out of school. And you should take it as seriously as the faculty do. And at the same time, you want to know what it is so you can avoid it. One of our instructors in the communication department is actually doing her dissertation on plagiarism in speech, student speeches. And so we talk about this a lot. And she said yesterday that the research shows that people who see plagiarism as a moral failing, as a big sin or crime, are the more likely to do it because they don't want to talk about it. It's sort of like people, and this is an odd example, but people who have back in the 80s and 90s, people who were HIV positive, they wouldn't get tested because they were, they thought, oh, it couldn't be me. It's a crime, it's a sin, it's terrible if you have HIV, so I'm not going to get tested, it couldn't be me. So it's kind of a bad analogy, but it's a little bit the same. If you're afraid of it, you're not going to understand what it is. So we're not here to punish you, we're here to teach you to not do this. But if you insist on doing it, there will be, after being warned and after being instructed on it, there will be consequences. So, and I'm smiling as I say that. So I hope this helps you. And again, keep in touch with how this affects you.